The Elves and the Otterskin by Elizabeth H. Boyer. Chapter 2. Ivar huddled behind the stone, not daring to look around it at the grave and the headless ghost. He could not remove the picture of the ghost from his mind as its hands ran over the ground searching for the head. When he finally did peek around the stone, certain he would see the apparition still searching for its head, he was completely amazed to see nothing of the kind. Nothing was there but a slight mound in the grass which showed no sign of ever being disturbed. Nor was there a charred circle where a fire had burned. Ivar raced for the top of the hill, but Birna had not waited for him. He ran homeward, never minding the bushes that clawed at him like scraggy little hands, or the streamlets and pools that he splashed through. He didn't know how he arrived there, but he came stumbling in just as Birna was taking the kettle off the coals to pour 2 strong cups of tea. "A necromancer!" he gasped, "in the stone circle, and he called a ghost out of that grave and cut its head off." Birna nodded and fastened the door shut with a jerk of her head. Her hooded eyes glowed in their nets of wrinkled skin. "Remember your lessons now, and give me the points that enabled you to recognize a personage of power, whether of ice and darkness or fire and light." Ivar circled the room distractedly, finally seizing upon an old staff. "This is no time for lessons. We've got to defend ourselves. They know who you are, and they must be somewhere nearby." "Nonsense. There are no necromancers between here and the northernmost tip of Skarpski. You're dawdling." "Ivar, tell me how one recognizes a personage of power." "Birna, you can't just sit there swallowing tea and nagging me about some inconsequential lessons at a time like this. We're in danger. Get up and start working some spells, or grab a club. I wish I had a sword, or at least a bow and arrows." He flew around the tiny house from one window to the other, checking the bar on the door half a dozen times. "Ivar, will you stop this insane behavior and listen to me?" Birna rose up, with flashing eyes and a commanding shout. Ivar sank into his chair at once. "If anyone was threatening us, I would be the first to know. Don't you suppose? You forget how insignificant 2 years of training is to the many years I have practiced. The lesson you have seen was well nigh wasted upon you, yet you've been clamoring at me for a year to test you. Well, this was your test, and I must say you've done rather poorly." Ivar shriveled miserably. "But I did see something," he said. "Did you know Lorimer was going to appear right there at that particular time?" Birna sighed and picked up her wool and began carding. After a moment of briskly scraping the fibres back and forth, she replied, "You still don't know what you saw." Ivar stared at her, trying to decide if she was testing his memory or his powers of conviction. "I saw a necromancer, Lorimer, who was raising a ghost from a grave," he said stubbornly. "I'm certain of it, aren't I?" "No," said Birna. "What you saw is what we call a ghoul. It wasn't the real Lorimer or the real Gruus. It was the image of them after the real event. I've told you frequently that everything done leaves its impression, and most particularly deeds that are crimes or murders or other evil things. Using certain spells, a gifted magical personage can recall any important action that took place on a particular spot. If Lorimer really had been there, do you think you could have stood not 10 paces away and him not seen you? We could go back and do it all over again if you'd like, but I want you to be certain you'll recognize Lorimer if you ever see him again." Ivar leaned his chin on his hands. "I'll know him a mile away. There's no need to go through that again. Only an image, you say, and the real necromancer is far away from here doing something quite different." Birna stared at him, not at all pleased, and he suddenly felt tired and discouraged. She said sharply, "Now I know you're not as stupid as you're pretending to be. You've forgotten the most important part about the whole lesson, Ivar." "I'm not pretending. I am stupid," he growled, trying to think and straighten out his fear-befuddled wits. "Oh yes, I remember now. The 5 Alpha spies and Svartar. He wants a Svartar strike for his own, so he's going to—" "Yes, I've known about it for quite some time, Ivar. Longer than I've known you." "Has anyone warned Svartar? What does Elbergast plan to do?" "They don't know about it. Time in the Alpha realm is quite a different commodity than here. Now that's enough talk about the ghoul for tonight. You won't speak of this to a solitary living soul. And now that you've seen Lorrimer, I feel I must give you a warning. I believe it is no longer safe for you to wander about after dark, alone in the fells. Now don't interrupt me, let me finish. You can still be out late after visits to sick folks or animals, so long as I am there to protect you." Ivar gaped at the little shrew-like Birna and tried not to laugh. She was not nearly so tall as his shoulder, and although she was remarkably tough and strong, she weighed no more than a child. She glowered at him fiercely as if reading his thoughts. "It's a feeling I have," she snapped, "and don't you dare disobey. The time will come when you'd be grateful for my protection. Now away with you to your bed. Hasten, hasten." Ivar hoped she would forget about her feeling. He enjoyed coming and going alone and working his own cures on the livestock of Havita Ness, but if Birna was there she would get all the credit and the praise. When word arrived one afternoon that an important farmer's horse was sick, Ivar attempted to dissuade Birna from going. Bjarganestead is a long way to walk. I can speed over there and back much quicker if you don't care to trouble yourself. I know that old horse just needs a nettle infusion to get him on his feet." "Ha! You're saying I'm too old and decrepit, is that it?" "That's putting it bluntly, Berna, but I can walk faster than you." "Bah, if I wanted to, I could fly you there, before you'd even got your elbows off the table. You hoped I'd forgotten about what I said about walking alone after dark, didn't you?" "Well, of course. I'm almost a man grown and not afraid of the dark. It hurts my pride something terrible to have to be protected by a little old stick of a woman." He tried to look aggrieved, but all he could do was scowl. "Wouldn't it be more appropriate for me to be watching over you? I've had the feeling since I got here that you would just as easily along without me. Or maybe it would be easier if I wasn't here getting in your way and asking a lot of questions." Birna smiled her rare smile and gave him a quick pat on the arm. "What a lot of blither. You'll have your opportunity, lad. Now let's get over to Biagi and his sick horse." The horse was an old and esteemed member of the family, nearly 20 years old and nearly blind, but much beloved. He had to be examined and treated with all due considerations of his status in the family, and by the time this was done, with all of Biagi's family hanging about to ensure that it was done right, and 1,000 questions asked and answered, it was long after dark. To Ivar's disgust, Birna refused an offer of supper, and set off into the fells, lighting a small lantern to hang on the end of her staff. Her long cloak covered her from head to toe, to protect her from the night vapours, she said, but it also had the effect of rendering her as black as the shadows. She walked along surprisingly quick and quiet, and her eyes and ears seemed to observe more than Ivar's did in broad daylight. As they walked, no time was wasted. Birna was teaching him a catalogue of the dwarf king, several hundred years before the first Viking cast his envious eyes upon Skarpski's pleasant shore. Suddenly she halted. Suddenly she halted, gripping Ivar's arm warningly, and her "St" silenced any protests. Ivar strained his ears and rolled his eyes around until they ached. Birna's hand tightened on his arm, silently turning his attention to the left. His spine was bathed in icy perspiration, and he felt the same prickly feeling of horror he had experienced on the night of the ghoul. All he saw was a darker shadow flitting across their path with a faint halo of luminescence about it. After it had gone, Birna started him down the path again at the same no-nonsense pace. "A black dwarf, or I don't know a dwarf from a hayhook," she grumbled. "Here, in this realm?" whispered Ivar with a squeak. "Spying, no doubt, for Lorrimer. We shall have to be more cautious, if that's what things are coming to. I simply can't let you out of my sight for a moment." She prodded him anxiously with the staff, as if to make sure he was really still there, and not an illusion. "But what? I don't understand." "Hush now. This is no place to discuss anything. Ears everywhere." It was 4 days before Ivar could convince Berna to answer his questions. He had to help her slaughter the sheep for winter, smoking part of the meat, drying some, and salting some away in barrels. "Winter is getting very close," she said, sitting down at last and taking out her odd little pipe. "The first snow will arrive any day now, and there's something I must show you before it comes. I expect it will answer all your questions at last." Ivar looked at her uncertainly. "After feeling that cold wave of power pass by us the night we went to Bjargistead, I'm not sure I'm so curious any more." "That was only a minor black dwarf, hurrying home to supper, no doubt," said Birna. "We have a much more serious situation on our hands now." She gazed around the storage room where they had been salting meat. It was a cozy, crowded room filled to bursting with stored food and goods for trading, and fragrant with the delicious smell of smoked mutton which was to be eaten on Midwinter's Day. Ivar had always liked the storage room, but now the image of the necromancer sprang into his mind, and Ivar felt the first feather-light touch of fear. Birna was gazing out the open door to the steep green fell beyond. "Havitafell has its safe places," she said, "as well as its dangerous ones. They say the great smiths of the dwarfs used to keep their forges here inside the mountain. The first skiplings to settle here used to leave a horse to be shod, and a piece of gold on a stone, and the next morning the horse would have a new set of shoes, and the gold would be gone. That's how close the two realms used to be. It has been a long time since a skipling crossed over from this realm into that." "You mean I'm to go over at last?" Ivar swallowed dryly. His old excitement was somehow contaminated with a dose of healthy fear. Birna inclined her head in a single nod. "Last night, while you were asleep, I had a visitor from the other side." Ivar leapt up. "Why didn't you waken me? You know I've been dying to see a real Alfar." He paced around the tiny room, anguished. "What about my lessons? And I was up in the loft just above. Why didn't you?" Birna held up her hand for silence. "We talked of nothing but you, if you really must know. I thought it better if you didn't hear until the next step is taken. I have done my part in preparing you. It's time for you to go on, Ivar, whether I think you are ready or not." "Go on? Where? Can't I stay here any longer? You want me to go back to Fishless?" Birna shook her head, casting her eyes upwards. "We shall go back to the kitchen, and I shall explain." Making tea and putting together a meal seemed to help Birna organize her thoughts. She tore apart a fresh loaf of bread, spread butter on it, and watched Ivar devour it. He wondered at her silence, and likewise kept silent, until he had eaten the bread and drunk a cup of Birna's very special ale, from a very small cask she kept hidden until special occasions took place. And now, prompted Ivar gently, the messenger. Birna roused herself from her scowling reverie. Ah, yes, the messenger. He came to tell me that Ottar, the king of Svartar, has been killed, and the murder assigned to the 5 Alfar spies. In cases such as this, the Alfar laws are similar to our own. The nearest kin of the victim has the right to self-judgment over the murders. Svartar captured them the day after the killing had been reported. And killed them? Said Ivar. Who were killed? Birna shook her head. Svartar released the 5 spies, but so long as they are in Svartalstrike, they are outlaws, which means no one can give them any help, or food, or shelter, without risking outlawry also. The Alfar have until the autumn equinox to cover the Otterskin with gold. If they can't, then Svartar will exact a blood price on a great many Alfar. The pelt of an otter isn't very large, said Ivar, but Birna glowered at him. Did I forget something? The pelt, she snapped, is not merely the skin of the dead animal. It will take barrow loads of gold to cover it. When gold is placed upon it, it grows larger. Perhaps the pelt, like Svartar's grief, has no limits. He is like a creature possessed. Ivar nodded. Yes, well, it's going to be a frightful mess, I fear. But what has all that to do with you or me, actually? We're a world away from it, and we've built up a cosy little business here. I thought I was being trained to take your place one day, a long time hence. This talk of moving me on is very upsetting. I like it here, Birna. Yes, you are getting a trifle too comfortable here, Birna said. But I've done my best in the time allotted, and I believe you won't be completely shocked by what you find on the other side. Then she muttered almost to herself, May the gods preserve us both if I've made a mistake. And that was positively the last Ivar could get out of her. Early the next morning she led him up the heights of Hvitafell. Saving her breath for climbing, she strode ahead in silence, pausing only to catch her wind and fan her face. Ivar fetched her an icy drink from a freshet, battering its rocky way down towards the sea. After a brief rest, she left the path and struck across the meadow. Close to its centre, she stopped and poked at something on the ground. There, she said, tapping firmly on a smooth white stone. What do you see? A white stone, smoothly rounded, about the size of a round tub. Ivar peered at it intently. Some moss on it, too. Is something under it, besides the everlasting rocky soil of Skarpski? Birna made no answer. She extended her staff at arm's length, up the smooth green side of the fell. And what do you see up there? Ivar knew better than to say nothing, even when it was the truth. Ivar was likely to whack him for such an answer. I see a hillside and plenty more rocks, bushes, a hare. Birna made her disapproving sound. What about the rocks? Black, volcanic. Ivar shrugged. Then he understood. This rock is white and smooth, probably from a riverbed. It had to be put there by human hands, or something. Heavy, too. I wonder how they carried it. He began to look around. Birna pointed again. He raised his eyes to the skyline. A notch cut in the hillside, Birna. By hands. Now you're seeing, she said with a nod. Ivar turned and looked downhill. One of the solitary standing stones stood there, tilting slightly to the east, as if nodding to the rising sun. The 2 white stones and the notch were arranged in a straight line leading towards the inland, where nobody ever ventured. It's called a ley line or a line of power, said Birna. They are everywhere, passing through holy hills and circles, and barrows and springs. In ancient dark times, this was the only safe way to travel in either realm. Of course, we haven't used whatever strange old powers were lurking in this ley line and circles, not in centuries. But should you need to find a safe space sometimes, these lines will never guide you wrong. Remember that. And remember that high places are usually safe places. When you need to find a ley line, you simply douse for it with a pendulum. You remember our experiments with dowsing for hidden objects, metal and so forth. On the places where where two ley lines cross is safety. She stopped a moment, suddenly breathless. You must remember about high places, safe places, low places. Gasping, she glared around at the empty autumn landscape. Or dark places are evil. The white stones. She clutched at her throat, wheezing. Her lips were a strange blue color. Birna, what is it? Ivar steadied her as she swayed. Power. Evil, she gasped, starting to stagger towards the upright stone, about 50 yards down the hillside. They're trying to get you. Run, dance in a circle, concentrate 3 or 9 times. Her voice failed, and she floundered to her knees despite Ivar's attempts to hold her up. She clutched her chest, grimacing with pain. Birna, what'll I do? She groped for her satchel, wheezing. He grabbed it and dumped out its contents on the ground. She fumbled amongst the vials and pouches and at last seized a small blue vial. Ivar was terrified at the blue tint her face was turning, and it sounded as if each tearing, ragged gasp would be the last. Her fingers and his struggled to pull the stopper from the blue vial. Glancing up for an instant, he thought he saw a man in a black cloak standing beside the notch in the skyline, arms upraised, fists shaking in a gesture peculiar only to magic. It was only an instantaneous glimpse. Birna suddenly tore the stopper from the vial, and in 2 lightning flicks of her hand she dashed some of the contents in each of his eyes. It stung, and he exclaimed, Birna, how can I help you if I can't see? What on earth? I'm falling. The impression of falling passed, and he rubbed his eyes with the back of his hands until he could finally see through a film of tears. He was still standing on the ground beside Birna, but her tortured breathing was silenced. His own breathing and heartbeat seemed to stop, too, as he looked down at her. The blue colour was fading, leaving a pallor foreign to her usual ruddy colour. Her eyes were open, staring at the sky, and the faint smile on her lips gave her an expression of surprised gladness. Ivar felt her wrists and throat, and found no heartbeat. She was dead. Hollowly he sat and stared, too stunned to move. In a moment the sun touched her pale features, and suddenly her form began to fade and melt away before his eyes. Reaching out with some idea of halting the unnatural process that was robbing him of her, he found himself holding only her empty cloak. Birna's body and her essence were both gone. He stood up shakily, gathering the heavy black cloak into his arms. Something fell into the dirt at his feet, a slender silvery knife with a gold-embossed handle, small and deadly for a feminine hand. He put it in his belt, and his senses began returning. Blinking his still burning eyes, he looked around in gathering consternation. A cold wind was jerking at his clothes, and the pleasant green meadow of Havitafell had simply vanished. Instead, he was standing in a rocky, rubbly ruin, atop a slight hill, looking down into a valley savaged by wind and glacier. The wind streamed over the standing stones at his back and howled away down the desolate valley between 2 rugged backfells. Ivar cowered backwards against the stones. Nothing was familiar in the least. He could hear the thunder of a high sea far to the west, where the sun was sinking, and the sea mist rose up sullenly. He could discern no sign of habitation, no scattered sheep grazing, no wisp of smoke from a lonely shieling. In a small voice he called, "Berna," but the wind snatched the sound away and hurled it among the jumbled stones. End of chapter 2.